What if I told you that the Garden of Eden might not be just a metaphor, but a real place, hidden to this day, a lost paradise buried by time, protected by mysteries that span millennia? The Bible describes this garden in astonishing detail: rivers, trees, pure gold, and a direct connection between heaven and earth. But what if this description isn't symbolic? What if, in some forgotten corner of the planet, there are still traces of the place where humanity began its journey? This possibility has fascinated scholars, theologians, and archaeologists for centuries. Where exactly did the 4 rivers mentioned in Genesis flow from? Did Eden exist among the valleys of Mesopotamia? Or was it buried beneath layers of earth after the flood that changed the face of the world? The truth is that the more we delve into Scripture and the clues left by history, the more we realize that perhaps Eden was never lost, merely veiled from our eyes. And then comes the burning question: why would God hide Eden? Was he waiting for the right time to reveal this place again? Could this return to paradise be a key piece in the prophecies of the end times? What you'll discover next may surprise you. There are ancient maps, geographical theories, and even occult traditions that point to possible locations of the Garden of Eden, places where the sacred and the earthly seem to touch. Stay with me until the end, and first check if it's written on the channel, because this journey could change the way you see the past, and even the future. And what comes next could shed new light on the greatest mystery of creation. Because understanding what the Garden of Eden really was, or still is, can reveal more than just a physical location. It can expose a hidden truth about the very purpose of human existence. The Bible, in Genesis, presents Eden to us as the starting point of creation, a space where man and God lived in perfect communion, without barriers, without pain, without fear. But at the same time, this paradise disappears almost suddenly, as if it had been torn from history, leaving only enigmatic traces scattered throughout ancient stories and symbols buried in time. The location of Eden has been the subject of speculation for centuries. Some scholars point to the region of Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, an area that, curiously, is also considered the birthplace of the first human civilizations. But is this coincidence really just that, a coincidence? Or is there something behind the scenes of history that we have not yet seen? The impact of this possibility is enormous, because it changes the way we think about the origin of humanity, and more than that, about our destiny. There are ancient maps, Babylonian records, and Persian traditions that speak of a sacred garden located beyond the great river, a place where the gods walked with men and where knowledge was pure. Interestingly, these accounts resemble, in detail and atmosphere, what Genesis describes. What separates myth from revelation? Could it be that the collective memory of humanity holds real fragments of a time that was erased by wrong decisions, by a fall that altered the course of all creation? And the most intriguing thing, Eden was not destroyed. It was protected. Genesis states that God placed cherubim with flaming swords to guard the way to the tree of life. This scene, shrouded in symbolism and mystery, raises an essential question. If the way was blocked, it is because it still exists. The tree is still there. The garden is still there. Invisible, perhaps. Untouched for now, but real. And what separates man from this place is not just geography, but a question of mentality, of spiritual transformation, of reconnecting with that which was lost. This realization changes everything, because it takes the focus away from the purely geographical search and places us on an inner journey, a search for restoration, for redemption, for a return to the origin. And when we look at the prophecies, especially those in the book of Revelation, we realize that Eden is not just the beginning, it is also the end. A new garden, a new Jerusalem, where there will once again be the tree of life, and where God will return to dwell with men. This shows us that the plan was never abandoned, just postponed. The truth is that Eden has always been more than a place. It is a point of impact between the divine and the human, between the visible and the invisible, between what we were and what we can be again. And understanding this can completely change the way we view not only the biblical story, but our own story. Because when Eden was no longer before our eyes, another journey began, a journey that is still ongoing. And when we talk about the Garden of Eden, We are not just trying to locate a point on the map. We are touching on something that divides interpretations, beliefs, and even ways of seeing reality. Some say that Eden was a literal geographical place with actual coordinates, possibly located between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in ancient Mesopotamia. A garden of indescribable beauty, where everything was balanced and harmonious before the first great rupture. But there is also another, more symbolic line of thought that sees Eden as a spiritual space, a higher dimension of direct communion with the Creator, a state of pure consciousness prior to guilt, pain, separation. This tension between science and faith, between the tangible and the invisible, creates a gap that is difficult to bridge. How can we prove something that is beyond matter, but at the same time seems to have left such concrete marks on human history? Is Eden an archetype engraved in the ancestral memory of humanity? Or is it really a territory that we once set foot on, but from which we were expelled by our own decisions? The truth may lie in both extremes, and it is precisely this duality that makes Eden such a powerful enigma. Science seeks evidence, maps, fossils, traces of ancient rivers. Faith, on the other hand, seeks meaning, purpose, reconnection. When these two visions meet, the impact is profound, because it reveals that perhaps we do not have to choose between one or the other. Perhaps Eden was both physical and spiritual at the same time, a real place that existed in tune with a higher reality, where body and spirit were not in conflict, but in perfect unity. And if so, then what we lost was not just a territory. It was a state of existence, a way of living, a balance that has been broken. And this changes everything, because it shows that the return to Eden does not just require maps or archaeological excavations, but a change of mentality, an internal transformation, a reunion with what still beats within us, even after so many ages of separation. And if this garden has not been erased, but merely hidden from the eyes of a disconnected world, then perhaps the greatest revelation is yet to come. Among the many layers of mystery surrounding the Garden of Eden, one of the most intriguing remains its possible location. If we assume that Eden was indeed a physical place, a real space in time and space, the inevitable question is, where exactly was it? And even more so, is it still possible to find it? Several theories have been put forward over the centuries, some based on sacred texts, others supported by archaeological, geographical, and even climatological studies. The most widely accepted theory, especially among biblical scholars and historians, points to the region of Mesopotamia, where modern-day Iraq is located. This is where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers still flow, two of the four waterways mentioned in Genesis as having their source in Eden. This lends considerable weight to the hypothesis that the garden existed in that strip of fertile land between the rivers, known as the Fertile Crescent, the cradle of the first human civilizations, and the scene of countless biblical and historical events. But not everyone agrees on this location. Some researchers suggest that Eden would be in a region further north, in what we now know as Turkey, where the aforementioned rivers also originate, and where there is archaeological evidence of ancient and sophisticated cultures, such as the mysterious site of Göbekli Tepe. Others go further, pointing to Africa, especially the region of Ethiopia, associating the name of one of the biblical rivers, the Gihon, with the Blue Nile. There are even more radical theories that speak of the North Pole as the true original paradise, based on apocryphal texts, Norse legends, and ancient maps that placed the navel of the world in the extreme north. These possibilities arouse more than mere geographical curiosity. They touch on a hidden truth. Perhaps Eden was deliberately hidden, erased from the surface of the earth after the fall of man, or even moved outside of our present reality. And if so, any clue that approaches its true location ends up being an invitation to rethink everything: history, geography, spirituality, and even our own origins. Because the impact of finding, or even trying to find, Eden goes far beyond an archaeological discovery. It is a search for meaning, for reconciliation with something we have lost not only in space, but in the soul. And even among scholars who believe that the garden no longer exists in physical form, many argue that its memory was left to provoke in us a movement of return, an internal transformation that is reflected externally in the way we look at the world. Each new hypothesis, each trace, each parallel between ancient texts and modern evidence takes us deeper into this journey. A journey that crosses centuries, ruins, maps, but which, deep down, is driven by a much deeper desire to rediscover the starting point of humanity, where it all began, and where somehow everything can fall back into place. However, there is a point in the biblical narrative that may have forever changed the possibility of us finding Eden again. An event so grand and devastating that it not only redefined the geography of the world, but also sealed the fate of everything that came before it, the flood. The story of Noah is not just a tale of waters covering the earth. It is a radical shift in the divine plan, a divide between what was and what was left. And when we consider the impact of this global cataclysm, the inevitable question arises, was Eden destroyed by the waters, or just hidden for good? According to the Genesis account, man's wickedness had reached such a level that God decided to intervene with a severe judgment. The floodgates of the heavens opened, the abysses gushed forth, and everything was submerged. Mountains disappeared, continents shifted, rivers were rearranged. The landscape of the pre-flood world was completely reconfigured, and with this, many believe that the Garden of Eden, if it was still accessible at that time, was completely covered over, perhaps buried under oceans or hidden by layers of mud and stone. Others believe that it was removed from the earth, taken to a spiritual dimension beyond human reach, as a sign that that state of perfect communion would only be restored at the end of all things. This possibility carries immense symbolic weight. Eden, as a representation of man's original state with God, being overshadowed by divine judgment, represents not only the loss of a place, but the definitive breaking of a connection. The flood destroyed not only the earth, but also that which held the most sacred value on it, the vestige of pure creation before corruption. And the most intriguing thing is that, even after all this, the biblical text never directly mentions the final fate of the garden. It simply disappears from the narrative, like an unsolved mystery, like a missing piece that remains echoing in the background of the story. This silence leaves room for all kinds of speculation, but also for something even deeper, a reflection on the consequences of human decisions. Eden is gone, but not without reason. It was lost because of disobedience, because of rupture, because of the conscious choice to follow a path of separation. And the flood came as the limit of this fall, as a sign that decisions have an impact not only on the present, but on the entire structure of the world. On the other hand, there are those who believe that Eden still exists, untouched, guarded by invisible forces, in a place inaccessible to human eyes, not destroyed, but preserved, as if God had protected that place from contamination, waiting for the right time for it to be revealed again. And this changes everything, because it invites us to see Eden not as a closed past, but as a possible destiny, a place that has not been forgotten, just veiled, like a treasure reserved for a moment of final restoration. When we look at Eden not just as a place of the past, but as a future promise, everything takes on a new dimension. What seemed lost forever begins to reveal itself as part of a much larger plan, a cycle that began with a garden and ends with a city, a transformation that points to something that goes far beyond geographic restoration, a total restoration of humanity. In Revelation, the last book of the Bible, there is a description that awakens something deep in the soul, a new heaven, a new earth, and a new Jerusalem coming down from above, prepared as a bride, adorned for her groom. There, God promises to wipe away every tear, eliminate pain, death, and suffering. And at the center of this new creation, the tree of life appears again, the same one that was in the middle of the Garden of Eden. This image is not random. She is the key. The biblical narrative does not end far from where it began. She makes a complete turn. What was lost in the beginning is promised back, not as a repetition, but as a reunion elevated to a new level of consciousness, of eternity, of restored communion. This is not just symbolic, it is eschatological. It is the revelation that God never gave up on the original plan. The garden was made inaccessible, yes, but it was not destroyed. It was reserved. And the New Jerusalem is not just a heavenly city in the abstract sense. It carries elements straight from Eden, a river flowing from the throne, trees that bear fruit all year round, healing for the nations. It is as if Eden, now purified and elevated, has once again taken center stage in history, but this time without the possibility of the fall, without the presence of evil, without the serpent lurking in wait. This promise has a direct impact on the way we view life today, because if Eden is at an end, it also needs to be on our horizon. This changes the mindset with which we live, the decisions we make, the way we deal with time, with others, with the sacred. The return to the garden is not just a cosmic event. It is a journey that begins here, within each one of us who yearns for reconnection, for truth, for fulfillment. And this eschatological hope is not an escape from reality. On the contrary, it is a revelation that calls us to account, that reminds us that what seemed like only ruin and judgment may actually be the beginning of a new creation. The Eden of the end times will no longer be hidden, nor guarded by flaming swords. It will be given, in full, to those who persevered, who, even far from the garden, kept alive the memory of something greater, something that is yet to come. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because when we look beyond the biblical text and begin to explore other ancient civilizations, a curious pattern begins to emerge, as if echoes of the same lost paradise were spread across different cultures, languages, and mythologies. It is as if Eden was not just a memory exclusive to the Hebrew people, but an ancestral memory, stored in the deepest roots of humanity. Among the Sumerians, one of the oldest civilizations on record, there are accounts of a divine garden called Dilmun, described as a place of purity, where there was no sickness, death, or aging, a place where the gods walked with men, and where the cosmic order was maintained in perfect harmony. This description, although it does not use the same names as the biblical tradition, carries elements very similar to those of Genesis: the absence of suffering, the presence of the gods, the idea of an ideal beginning. All of these point to the same symbolic root. The Babylonians, in turn, spoke of a sacred place called Eridu, which they believed to be the origin of humanity. Eridu was seen as the oldest city, the cradle of wisdom and civilization, surrounded by rivers and consecrated to the god Enki, associated with water and hidden knowledge. Once again, the narrative of a sacred and remote place, marked by its proximity to the divine, emerges as a key piece of human origin. Among the ancient Persians, especially in Zoroastrian traditions, we also find the idea of a heavenly garden, a paradise called Paradisa, a term that even gave rise to the word paradise in several Western languages. In this idealized space, the righteous would live in peace alongside gods and beneficent spirits. The concept of a perfect earth, separated from the chaos of the material world, resurfaces with force. These accounts cannot be dismissed as mere folkloric coincidences. They reveal something deeper, common memory shared by different peoples that points to a time before fragmentation, a time of unity, of balance, of connection with the sacred. This convergence of myths and traditions suggests that Eden, or whatever name each culture gave it, left a psychological and spiritual trace so strong that it crossed generations and borders, preserved in symbols, stories, and rituals. This truth, hidden between the lines of human history, forces us to rethink the concept of myth. Perhaps myth is not the opposite of truth. Perhaps myth is the ancient way of revealing a truth too profound to be spoken directly. And the impact of this is enormous, because it transforms the search for Eden into something that is not limited to the realm of faith or archaeology. It becomes an existential journey, a collective search for meaning, for reconciliation, for origin. When different peoples in different times and places speak of the same type of paradise, pure, sacred, lost, this cannot be ignored. Because perhaps this convergence is not an invention of the human imagination, but the vestige of something real, which marked the collective consciousness of all humanity. There is a specific scene in the biblical narrative that carries one of the most enigmatic symbols in all of human history. After the fall, after the rupture between God and man, something extraordinary happens. Genesis 3:24 says that the Lord placed cherubim at the east of the Garden of Eden and a flaming sword that turned. every way, to guard the way to the tree of life. This is not just a physical barrier. It is a sacred, deliberate separation, insurmountable by human logic. This moment marks the definitive break with the original condition. Man was not only expelled from the garden, he was prevented from returning, and not by chance. The tree of life represents access to eternity, to plenitude, to the incorruptible state, and to allow man in his fallen condition to return to it would be to perpetuate error, to crystallize disobedience into something immortal. That is why the cherubim appear as guardians of that which was lost, as sentinels of a divine secret. But the way in which this mystery is described goes beyond the literal. Cherubim with flaming swords, a powerful, almost dreamlike image that touches something deep in the collective unconscious. They are not there just as angelic figures. They represent the boundary between the sacred and the profane, between what we were and what we are not yet, ready to be again. This barrier has an immense symbolic impact because it speaks of a point of no return, of something that can only be crossed through transformation. It is not about invading Eden by force, but about earning it back. And what is being protected is not just a place, but a possibility, a second chance that will only be accessed at the right time, by the right people, with the right heart. It is as if this scenario reveals to us a hidden truth. The path to Eden has not been erased, it has been sealed. The image of the flaming sword cannot be ignored either. It represents movement, judgment, purity. Fire, throughout the biblical tradition, is a symbol of divine presence, of refinement, of testing. Access to the tree of life is not only forbidden, it is enveloped in fire, a fire that consumes what is impure and reveals what is true. This shows us that the return to the garden is more than a geographical journey. It is an internal process, a change of mind, reconstruction of essence. And when we look at this deeply, we understand that this heavenly guardian is not there to punish, but to protect something sacred, something that still awaits us, but that demands spiritual maturity, full awareness, and decisions aligned with the truth. Because the sword that prevents also reveals. It forces us to stop, reflect, and transform. This moment in the narrative marks a rupture, yes, but it also carries the seed of a reunion, the silent promise that one day, the path may be opened again. And when that happens, it will not be by force, nor by shortcuts, but by a journey that spans time, heart, and soul. There comes a time when the inevitable question arises, loaded with a weight that is not only theological, but existential. Why did God hide Eden? Or did he never take it away from here? And the garden is still among us, invisible to the eyes, but not to the soul. This doubt is not just geographical, it is spiritual. From the moment man was expelled from Eden, the feeling of loss began to inhabit the human heart. Not just the loss of a place, but of a communion, from a direct, sensitive, living connection with the Creator. And this separation is not something we can easily ignore. It accompanies us in the silences of life, in the unanswered questions, in the longing for something that we may never have touched, but somehow we know existed, or that it still exists. The idea that God would have hidden Eden may sound harsh, even uncomfortable, but perhaps it reveals more about us than it does about him. Eden was not simply locked away, it was protected, not because God wanted to keep man away, but because after the fall, man could no longer inhabit a space of perfection without corrupting it. And this is one of the most painful hidden truths of the human journey. There are places, experiences, and revelations that can only be accessed through transformation, and until that transformation happens, the garden remains sealed. On the other hand, there is also a perspective that intrigues and excites. What if Eden never ceased to exist in this world? What if he is still here, hidden in plain sight, but only those with eyes prepared to see, those who align their spirit with truth, can recognize him? There is something deeply symbolic in this idea. Paradise, not as a lost place, but as a sacred dimension that reveals itself little by little as we get closer to the essence for which we were created. This possibility changes everything because it raises a question that confronts us directly. Are we still worthy of entering the garden? Have we, as humanity, traveled far enough on this journey back? Or are we still stuck in the same mindset that kept us from it in the first place? The loss of Eden was not just a punishment, it was a consequence. And every consequence carries with it a responsibility. The impact of this rupture goes beyond the biblical narrative. It affects the way we live, the way we relate to one another, the way we seek meaning in the midst of chaos. It is as if the absence of the garden reminds us, day after day, that something essential is still missing. That creation cries out for restoration, that the human heart remains restless until it finds its place of origin. And perhaps that is precisely why God did not destroy Eden, because he knew that one day, when the time was ripe and hearts were prepared, humanity could find its way back, not through merit, but through reconnection, not through force, but through surrender, not as fugitives wanting to escape pain, but as conscious children wanting to restore lost communion. What if we are closer to Eden than we think? This question echoes not as a vague supposition, but as a silent call. Because if we look closely at the signs around us, spiritual, moral, even natural, something begins to reveal itself. The feeling that time is speeding up, that prophecies are leaving the realm of the symbolic and taking on concrete contours. The Bible not only narrates the closing of the garden, it also announces its reopening. And this return to paradise will not be as before. It will be greater, definitive, eternal. The book of Revelation describes a new beginning, where there will be no more separation between God and man, where he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and pain will be no more, where the tree of life, once guarded by cherubim, will once again bear its fruit, healing the nations. This is not just a poetic tale. It is an eschatological promise, a vision of the future that is gradually approaching the present. Eden, in this context, is not just a lost garden. It is the final destination of a restored humanity. And perhaps this return is not as far away as we imagine. Perhaps it is not just an end times event, but the culmination of a journey that has already begun, within each one who seeks, who believes, who transforms. Because the distance that separates us from Eden is not just geographical, it is spiritual. And this distance begins to diminish every time a heart turns to the Creator. Every time a life chooses reconciliation instead of separation. The hope of Eden reborn is not fantasy. It is a promise that pulses in eternity, but that already takes root in the present. And when we least expect it, what was lost will be returned, not as before, but as we never dared to imagine. Paradise is not just in the past. It awaits us at the end of the journey, and perhaps it is much closer than we can see. If you've made it this far, it's because this journey through the mystery of Eden spoke to you in some way, and that says a lot. This type of content, which delves deep into the layers of history, faith, and spirit, only makes sense when it finds open hearts and curious minds like yours. So, if this topic touched you, leave a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Until the next video.